This took place 2 summers ago in the hometown of the Cowboys. Now I am aware of human trafficking in this city. I had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to rat on her family. However, I never thought they randomly snatched people. In all the stories they use drugs or coercion. So 2 summers ago, I am cycling to a smoke shop. It's kind of out of my way in a not great neighborhood, but I'm fairly confident. It's daylight, I ride all over the city, and I know the store. I was 24, short, and had short pink hair, but I always considered myself too intimidating to kidnap. I forget that even if I am a veteran, I'm also a short white girl. I pull up to a crosswalk, and I'm waiting for a light when 2 Hispanic guys start catcalling me from a windowless white van. No identification, no stickers. Even the way they yelled at me was weird. It wasn't the typical, nice tits or heard let me fuck you, locker room bullshit. They would talk to each other and then yell through a cracked window about how we are gonna get you. You are next. It felt off like they were excited, but I just flipped them both off and rode away. End of the story, right? Over a mile later, I'm right around the block from my destination. To set it up, there was a massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots, on my right. That was the side I was riding down. To my left, there was a back fence of a very, very old and probably abandoned house. It was like that all around, mostly drifters or old people in poverty. A few trap houses. The point is there was no one else visible, and even if they had seen this, they wouldn't have said anything for their own safety. I'm pedaling along when the album ends, and I think I'm almost there. I'm not gonna stop and fumble with my phone. This saved my life. As I'm thinking this, a white van pulls up on my left and stays right inside my peripheral. They revved the engine a few times and tried to spook me, but something told me not to move. Don't let them know you know. So I acted like my music was playing and pedaled a little faster. Up ahead of me was a brick wall to my left and a tall tree over it before a quick alley entrance. Suddenly they punched the gas and pulled up in front of me, stopping next to the brick wall. They were trying to corner or funnel me, putting me in a position where I had to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in a span of maybe 7 seconds. I honestly didn't feel panic. I didn't actively register any fear or sweat or anything. It was like someone much calmer took over my body and was like, nope. I remember instantly crossing the street without even thinking about the movements or why. As I pedaled up their other side, I realized this was the van from before, and now it has a window repair magnet on the side. It's too small to look good and has absolutely no contact info. Just a generic name. I kept rubbernecking and see there was no one in the front, but there was movement behind the seats. The guys were in the back by the door. They had planned to literally drag me off my bike, off the street, and do God knows what to me. Once I was past, they scrambled into the front seat and pulled out so hard they burnt rubber. I got to the store safe, but I still hate myself for not taking the plate number. Not that it would do any good, they probably switched them out later. I knew I had almost been kidnapped and killed or worse. But it wasn't until I told the story to someone from Mexico that I found out it was traffickers. They said it sounded sadly familiar and happens all the time. I have no family and my roommates are just roommates. I would have been gone for 3 to 7 days before anyone decided something was wrong. Even then they would have just known I left on my bike and vanished. I would have been across the border or dead before anyone even knew I was gone. I am and have always been a very small girl, standing at 4 feet 11 full grown now at 27, and I have always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I am not wearing makeup. When I was a small child of about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fond place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita, but that is a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a four-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I ever had gone before, and it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the four-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually, I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seems like a bad idea, but this was a small town and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators, but being stupid kids we really didn't worry about that, and I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so tried confirming that it was my dad. This point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I answered, but no answers that would have hinted who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking, stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally, though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie made a comment. I cannot for the life of me remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I had been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my four-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you, you should come take a ride in my boat, he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize it wasn't my father. Dad? You're not Dad, are you? What are you talking about? He said. If you can see me. I started, feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second, before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly, "You're wearing an orange shirt. You have red hair, and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come ride in my boat?" At this point, my eyes widened, and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I don't know had been watching me, from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard, and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not, and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have confessed had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident, though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually, the weekend visits stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station/tobacco barn to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest I've ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had short crew-cut hair and a slightly unkempt beard and mustache combo. The first time we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, ordered his gas, and just stood there for 2 to 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times that this man came to visit, he would leave to pump his gas after staring at me awkwardly, about the 4th or 5th time after I thought he had left. I hear a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. There he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin and waving at me with just his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time I saw him, I will never forget, though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved and alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." "What?" I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away, and being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away. "I love you," I said uneasily. "Call me if you need anything dash. What's my number?" He asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion because he repeated himself, despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally, he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. "It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy. The person I'd have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person I'd have to call if I had a medical emergency or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care, I just did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to, but I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You'd think moving away would be the end of the story, but no, it got even worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case, considering I was in Galveston. I had needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school and the same classes as I was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we had owned a lake house up there. Instantly, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years, and suddenly my childhood playground took on an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently, the area was notorious for pedophilia, kidnappings, and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either go missing or be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details, of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff I had encountered, she kinda paled and wouldn't tell me any more, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town I had called my childhood summer home, and vow to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. It was February of 2014. This thing I was doing at work kind of came to a head all at once, and I was basically going to have to spend the entire weekend writing a press release that was needed the following Monday by 10 a.m. Now, my grandparents owned some property way out in the boonies of East Texas. I grew up going out there all the time for family get-togethers and whatnot. Since it was only a 45-minute drive away from where I lived, I would go out there with friends to camp/party/whatever. Well, I knew I was going to be writing all weekend, so I thought, why not spend it in the great outdoors instead of holed up in my apartment in Houston? I had never stayed out there by myself, but had always been keen on the idea, and I thought this would be an excellent time to do it. I called my granddad, asking if it would be okay for me to use the place for the weekend, and he said, of course. He did seem a little reticent about me doing it alone, but I was a 24-year-old guy who had grown up hiking and felt totally competent to handle anything that might happen. Honestly, at the time, I was a little insulted when he seemed to think me going out there by myself was not the best idea. He made sure I knew how to turn on the electricity and water. We use a well for water and have a big switch that turns on and off the electricity out there, which of course I did. I had only done it a million times when I brought friends. He asked if I had a key, which again, of course, I did. Finally, he said, "You know where I keep the Henry, right?" My granddad is kind of a cowboy and keeps a big .30 Henry repeater out there mainly for shooting whitetail, but never know. Yeah, I said, admittedly for the first time nervous since, to my knowledge, he was the only one who had ever stayed out there by himself, and he had never really talked to me about his guns. The only shooting I had done out there was with a pellet gun as a kid and then a camera as I got older. The drive out was nice after I got out of the city. I left work at 4:30 already packed and drove straight there. With traffic, I made it out there by about 6:45, still light, but it was beginning to turn to dusk. I took my duffel bag out of the trunk and went inside. The house is more like a small resort than a ranch house. It's really nice, which is why I enjoy taking people out there so much. My granddad was pretty well off and had the place built when he retired. It has 12 bedrooms, and I chose the upstairs sort of master bedroom, if you could call it that. I unpacked, sat on the bed, and opened my laptop to look at what I had to write and immediately closed it. Forget that, I thought, I'll work on that tomorrow. Now I want to take a walk. There is a trail that goes in a big circle around the perimeter of the property and is about 3.5 miles. It was dark out now, and the thought briefly crossed my mind to bring my granddad's gun, but I decided on a sturdy 5-foot wooden dowel instead so I could have a walking stick and wouldn't slip in the dark and shoot my foot off or something. I put on a hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and started off. It was a clear moonless night, and the swath of the Milky Way across the sky was impressive, but it was still really dark out. I didn't use my flashlight so my eyes would adjust, and after 10 or so minutes, I could see reasonably well. It was nice. Chilly, but nice. After about 1.5 miles, I decided to cut the route short through the woods and head back. I know the land so well that I could easily get back to the house from any point on the property. The woods and brush were pretty dense though, and I am forced to turn on the flashlight. A thick wall of twigs and vines is revealed. I push through it with my stick, getting a couple of scratches when I see something deeper in the woods partially obscured by the underbrush. It looks like someone left a pile of clothes in the woods. I keep the light trained on it for a second or two, trying to see what it is. Suddenly it jumps up really fast and sprints away further into the forest. My heart is in my throat, and my stomach does a somersault. I feel the pins and needles of an adrenaline surge all over. With all the force I can muster, I try to shout, "Who is that?" but I have no idea what it actually sounded like. Immediately I regret not having that rifle, but hell, I even left my cell phone on the bed. The worst part of it is, whoever the guy was took off in the direction of the house, and I can't remember if I locked the door. Now that the initial shock began to wear off, the real fear begins. It is suddenly very cold. Never before have I felt so isolated and so freaking stupid. I should have never come out here totally by myself. If that guy shoots me or something, nobody will even miss me until Monday. Okay, get a hold of yourself. You need to get your phone. I walk a mile through the woods freaking terrified. The woods end about 150 yards from the house's front patio, and I basically sprinted. Now, for any of you who have been in a situation like this, know that running does not help. You feel that gut-wrenching panic getting a foothold and constantly think something is right on your heels. When I get to the front door in this semi-sane state, I am in for another shock since the door is cracked open and I can't remember if I did it or not. I have to go inside. I push the door open holding the dowel sort of like a baseball bat and immediately hear shrieking coming from the living room. I don't think I have ever been as close to blind terror as I was at that moment. I would not have been able to speak. A strangled gaw escaped my throat, but I was hardly aware of it. I sprint up the stairs and into the room where my stuff is, at every turn expecting to see some horrific rotted corpse shrieking at me. I don't know why, but at that moment that is exactly what I thought I would see. I slam the door behind me and hear the scream again, from directly below me this time. I run into the bathroom and dial 911, locking the door and hiding in the shower. In retrospect, this seems like a really bitchy thing to do, but every ounce of bravado I had was long since drained. I tried to describe what was happening on the phone, but I'm not sure how much sense it made. There is a little town about 9 miles away from our property, and that was where the nearest police station was. It took them 20 minutes to arrive, during which I heard the scream one more time. It was lower pitched now and sounded strangled. Then came the freaking godsend of flashing red and blue lights through the window. I was still in the shower when I heard a man shout, "Police! Anyone here? Come out!" I got up and opened the bathroom door and hear a voice downstairs, "Christ! Evans, call an ambulance." I opened the bedroom door, and a cop down the hall has a gun on me saying, "Freeze." I try to explain that this is my family's place and I am the caller, but they still handcuff me. I soon see why. In the living room is the man I saw in the woods, on his back staring blankly upward, one arm outstretched at the ceiling and the other bent, but still reaching upward. His head was lying in a pool of blood. We eventually get it cleared up who is who and that I didn't crack the guy over the head. Later I find out that this guy was a paranoid schizophrenic, probably a homeless man who had wandered onto our property, hard to tell where from. We still don't know why he was bleeding, blunt force trauma of some sort, maybe a fall. So insane dude, you basically gave me like 3 heart attacks, so let's not meet. And I'm pretty sure if it was my granddad instead of me out there, you would have gotten shot. I did, however, get the press release done by Monday.